DUI cases, generally, there are kind of four general type of DUI cases. First, individual is arrested and they're requested to submit to a breath or urine test, and they refuse. They decide that it's not in their best interest to submit to that. So that's the one situation. The other typical situation is somebody is arrested, it's an alcohol impairment DUI, and they submit to what's known as a breath test or breath tests. They actually submit to two breath tests on an intoxilizer machine. Those are general. And then the third one is law enforcement believe it's a drug DUI, and they request that you submit to a urine sample, and they send it to a lab to determine what drugs may or may not be in your system. But there's a fourth one that is used in much more limited circumstances. That is where law enforcement draws your blood, where they have a nurse or someone qualified to draw your blood, and they submit it to a lab to determine what your blood alcohol level was, to determine if you were impaired. So, but they can't do that under all circumstances. Well, the question is, what is the circumstances that law enforcement, generally speaking, can do a blood draw? Number one, if an individual is involved in a DUI where someone is known as SBI, serious bodily injury to a person, or someone has unfortunately passed away as a result of a DUI, law enforcement it's a compulsory blood draw, a mandatory blood draw. They can pull your blood under those circumstances. If somebody has seriously been hurt as a result of a DUI, or in a situation somebody's unfortunately passed away. Another issue that we get is, well, what happens if there's an accident in a DUI, but nobody's seriously injured? It's a single car accident. No one's seriously injured. There's no DUI manslaughter. There's no death. But the person in the DUI, law enforcement cannot take the person to the police station to submit to a breath test. They can, under a current term called, if submitting to a breath test would be impractical, they then can request that you submit to a blood draw. So if someone's injured as a result of a single car crash, they need to be taken to a hospital for medical treatment. Law enforcement believes that there's evidence that this person, the driver, was impaired via alcohol. They then, under those circumstances, can say, well, it's impractical, so we're going to then, in that circumstance, request a blood draw. We're going to request what's called a legal blood draw in that case. The third circumstance, generally speaking, is what's called a medical blood draw. So, individual is involved in an accident. They then go to the hospital. A legal blood draw is not requested. Law enforcement doesn't request it. But after further investigation, they believe that there might be probable cause to believe that that individual was under the influence. So what they'll do, sometimes weeks or months later, they'll send a notice to our clients that they are going to be issuing a subpoena for their medical records. However, you can, as their defense attorney, object to the subpoena based on the fact that there's not enough evidence for them for that subpoena to be permitted in court. So basically, law enforcement says, we believe there's enough evidence that you were DUI, and we're going to issue a subpoena, which is essentially a court order to get your medical records from that particular day or night to determine if there was blood that was taken and determine what was in your system. However, in that circumstance, if you have a legal right to object to that subpoena, to that court order, and we've oftentimes, many times, our clients hire us to object to that, to try to get that important, vital piece of evidence held inadmissible, because maybe there wasn't enough evidence that you were impaired, and maybe law enforcement is going on what is known as essentially a fishing expedition. So in sum, those are essentially the four circumstances where law enforcement in the state of Florida, it's different in different states, but at least when it comes to the state of Florida, those are the circumstances where law enforcement can obtain evidence via a blood draw.